I think that mothers also made sure, because they believe that cannabis helps you concentrate, that when a child was scheduled for an exam, they made sure that they got the tea before they went to school for their exams. So I was kind of interested in that, so I did a little study, a small study of children who are given the tea and compared them academically with children who did not receive the tea. And again, found that there actually was very little difference between the two.
Okay.
But what was interesting to me was that I asked the teachers to tell me, because it was a blind study, I asked them to tell me which children they thought were the tea consumers. And the teachers coming from a more middle-class background always identified the smartest students as the ones who didn't drink tea. And that was actually not the case at all. Often there were many of the smartest students in the class, the highest performers in the class, who in fact were regular tea drinkers. So it shows again how people's perceptions of marijuana can really influence how they, identify smokers and non-smokers and so forth.
Yeah, good point. Very good point. Now, I know that after, well, go ahead and continue to tell me about the study, because I know that you revisited the study years later.
Well, that study actually led me to the study that you were probably thinking of, which is a comparison of prenatal exposure to marijuana, which we did in Jamaica. And that study really evolved from the recent thalidomide events in the United States. And people were always, at that time, scientists were very interested in the teratogenic effects of any substance. So what happens if you take the substance during pregnancy? And given that even then, cannabis was the third most commonly used substance during pregnancy, third only to cigarettes and alcohol. And I don't know where coffee fit in there. People ask me about that all the time. I really should maybe do that little research again someday. But there was a real concern. What would be the impact of serious cannabis smoking or any cannabis smoking during pregnancy? So I undertook a study that was modeled after the original adult male study, which was to take 30 cannabis-using women and 30 women who didn't use any cannabis, either tea or cannabis cigarettes, or they're called spliffs in Jamaica, who didn't smoke or didn't drink any cannabis, and then compare their offspring at 1 day, 3 days, and 1 month. Just to see if there was any immediate impact, a detectable impact of the marijuana during the neonatal period.
Okay, that's interesting, very interesting. And what did the studies conclude?
Well, the studies were kind of interesting. First of all, we dropped the 1 day evaluation of the infants. We followed these women basically from their 3rd or 4th month of pregnancy all the way through. So we had all the data about the progress of their pregnancies as well. But then we followed these babies in the first 24 hours, and we ended up dropping that because some of the babies were evaluated right after delivery. Some were evaluated 8 or 12 or even 20 hours after delivery. And we just felt there's such a dramatic change from being newly born to what happens almost a day later. So we decided to just go with the 3-day study and then with the 1 month study. So at 3 days, we could basically, the two groups of infants were indistinguishable. We could not really detect any differences, anything that the cannabis-exposed babies would have that the others didn't, or vice versa. So then those, the babies were home for a month with their moms, and then the mothers brought their babies back at 1 month, 28 days. And we took another look, and we used the Brazelton Neonatal Assessment Scale, which is sort of a neurobehavioral study, and it measures the ability of a baby to quiet itself, or to concentrate, or to follow an object, or either visually or through its hearing. And so we really examined these babies in detail, and the nurses who helped us, who were trained to perform the study, were blind to the infant's exposure. So they didn't know whether they were looking at a baby who had been exposed or not. And we found at 1 month that the babies who were exposed, whose mothers used marijuana during pregnancy, and they also used it during the breastfeeding period, actually did significantly better on all the variables in the Brazelton scale, which of course was very surprising to us. And we, but since we had done the other studies of, how men, men, those sort of counterintuitive things where men were psychologically better adjusted than their counterparts who were not using marijuana, we understood that this was as much a cultural phenomenon as perhaps a substance exposure phenomenon. So we were reluctant to say that, and I would never say today that, if you want to have a healthy, smart baby, smoke a lot of marijuana during pregnancy.
Right.
My best advice to pregnant women is to, take vitamins, eat well, avoid taking a lot of substances or any substances except when necessary. But many of the women who were using marijuana used it to relieve the nausea of pregnancy. They used it to improve their appetites, to help them sleep better. So we were surprised that there was such an astounding difference between the two sets, but we also attributed it to the real differences in the mothers and the social status of the mothers.
Right.
And I can go into some detail about that, but it's a little complicated, but, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that a big part of a child's development, and I think that this was reflective in your studies as well, the contributing factors were certainly, I think, more dependent on the interaction with the child and the stimulation that it got. Is this true? Was that the case?
No, I think that the mothers who, if you sort of understand a Jamaican culture in which women are not encouraged to smoke, that men really don't like to have women smoke. So the women who smoke are already pretty independent women, and meaning that they really do not need the fiscal resources provided by a man.
Right.
So often these women are women who are financially, they may still be low income. All our women were low income, but the smoking women had more control over their resources than the other non-smoking women. And so often they were able to create a better, I think, neonatal development environment for their children, because they often lived alone. If they had other children, they sort of maybe temporarily farmed them out to their fathers, the children's fathers' families. And they were able to really dedicate more time to the new baby. Many of them sold cannabis or ganja as a little home industry so that they didn't have to go out and work any place. They could stay home and attend to the baby if it needed to breastfeed or something like that. So I think that because of their independence, their financial independence, they weren't cooking for men, they weren't cooking for a lot of other children. They pretty much could focus on that little baby. I think that they were able to create a more salubrious environment for child development.
Yeah, I see. Now, what, out of everything in your entire experience, of course, I want you to take us back to the follow-up as well, and perhaps at the end you can share with us what that study left you with that you didn't have going in. What did you come out with on the other side that you probably hadn't even imagined that you would have stumbled across going into it? And that's personally or academically.
Well, personally, I was just amazed at the resilience of women who, many of whom were quite impoverished. They had all these children that they had to take care of. It was a struggle for them. And while the first pregnancy, maybe the second pregnancy, were really much more happy occasions,